Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo, and today I want to discuss the return of Dr. Besigye versus the Avengers ethos of MK, exploring the depth of philosophical reflections on political conjecture, deep state analysis, and political correctness, and its impact on democracy and multi-party in Uganda. Consider this a very vibrant and wonderful discussion so that we comprehend political philosophy as we understand it today. Listen, my friends, by way of trying to create an abstract in terms of what I want to discuss, the return of Dr. Besigye versus the Avengers ethos. Some of you are probably aware of that book, The Avengers Ethos, of MK, exploring the depth and philosophical reflections in terms of political conjecture, deep state analysis, and political correctness. I will try to navigate by way of intricate tapestry of Uganda's political landscape through a philosophical lens, delving into what I call dialectical clash between tradition and transformation, resistance and renewal. So the question here is that in my profound explanation, I will integrate the implications of Dr. Kiiza Besigye's resurgence within the FDC, or the Forum for Democratic Change, against the backdrop of the emergent ethos of embodiments of people like MK or PLU and the Avengers ethos. So through my rigorous examination of this political conjecture, deep state analysis, and nonsensical applications of political correctness, I will invite you to embark on what I call an intellectual odyssey, transcending the superfluities of partisan politics to cover the underlying truth that shape Uganda's democratic trajectory. Listen, my friends, at the heart of this inquiry lies the philosophical meditation in terms of the nature of democracy and multipartyism in Uganda. So I will probe the tension between individual agency and collective destiny, between entrenched power structures and nascent aspirations for change. I'll draw on insights from political theory, in terms of sociology, in terms of moral philosophy, and I'll illuminate these complexities in as far as political dynamics, shedding light on the interplay of ideology, identity, and the power that animates the nation's political discourse. Once again, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo. Welcome to Sui Generis, where we do philosophy and the law. We demystify the law for you. Central to my analytical dialectical debate between the arguments of Dr. Besigye's legacy in terms of resistance and the transformative ethos embodied in the Avengers movement of what they call PLU today. I will try to unveil existential currents that shape Uganda's socio-political landscape, confronting the challenges of this dynastic rule and also the erosion of democratic principles, but also the imperative of what they call national renewal. So as Uganda stands at crossroads, grappling with the competing visions of governance and societal progress, in terms of these philosophical reflections, I will try to serve as a guide or a beacon in terms of urging you to confront the complexities of political reality with intellectual rigor and moral clarity. So in terms of the return of Dr. Besigye as we know it today, we will try to argue that against the Avengers ethos of my friend and popular General MK, not merely as a treatise in terms of Ugandan politics, but as a philosophical odyssey, a journey into the depth of human consciousness. So where the struggle for democracy and multipartyism finds resonance with timeless truth and universal principles. So through these reflections, I will urge you to try to engage in terms of profound questions that animate Uganda's political landscape, forging a path towards a more enlightened and just future for all of us. And that is something that we must comprehend again from the word go. In terms of arguing the return of Dr. Besigye versus the Avengers ethos of MK in terms of exploring the depth, I'll try also to create the argument of whether or not the return of Dr. Besigye is an attempt to fill a vacuum perhaps that has now been created because of the appointment of MK to another substantive position as the head of of the army as we know it today, and also perhaps the removal of some substantive individuals who have actually been playing the game of creating a substantive political force by way of PLU. So could the return of Besigye be as a narrative that tried to create a fulfillment of a vacuum that has been created in the absence of substantive political opposition? Because we all know perhaps what is happening to NUP today in terms of the infights that are happening, and maybe this the creation or the return of Dr. Besigye could symbolize a legacy in terms of trying to assume that space again. But remember, we all also appreciate that the legacy of Dr. Besigye in terms of resistance against what he terms as authoritarian or advocacy for democratic ideals, while on the other hand, MK also embodies a transformative ethos to seek a transition in terms of what we call traditional political divisions. So as these forces collide, my argument is to create a philosophical dispensation, probing tensions between continuity and change, tradition and innovation. Listen, my friends, through this insightful reflection, I will invite you again to contemplate, as I said, in terms of the existential currents that shape Uganda's democratic trajectory, grappling with questions of power, identity, collective destiny. So with this intellectual rigor and moral clarity, I will challenge you to confront the complexities of political reality and envision a path towards a more enlightened and just future for all Ugandans. So in summary, as I argue by way of introduction, in terms of the return of Dr. Besigye versus the Avengers ethos of MK, exploring the depth, offering a thought-provoking journey into the heart of Ugandan politics, where philosophical inquiry illuminates the contours of democracy, multipartyism, and societal progress. So as Uganda stands at the crossroads, the argument is to serve as a guiding beacon, arguing you, my readers and listeners, to engage with profound questions that animate the nation's political landscape and chart a course towards more democratic and inclusive society. So this debate, my friend, becomes a question of do or dies. So the question is, does the return of Besigye into the politics of this country serve us any better, or is it simply something that we could argue in terms of a deep state analysis? We'll argue that. So the return of Dr. Besigye versus the Avengers ethos, exploring the depth, will escalate, as I said, a profound clash of ideologies and the approach within Uganda's political landscape, with significant implications for democracy and multipartyism in as far as our nation is concerned. So please understand that that is the debate that we want to engage in today, so that we comprehend what we know of Dr. Besigye vis-a-vis what we now know of what is happening in terms of the MK movement. Dr. Besigye obviously is a figure synonymous with defiance against entrenched power structures, and he embodies argumentatively a tradition of opposition rooted in resistance to authoritarianism and advocacy for democratic ideals, not so. And therefore his return to the forefront of Ugandan politics represents a resurgence of a narrative grounded in the struggle of political reform, as far as transparency and accountability. Obviously, Besigye's enduring influence obviously also underscores the persistence of dissent and the quest for political change within Uganda's multi-party system. In contrast, however, we need to comprehend and pay allegiance and comprehend and understand that the Avengers ethos, as we know, Muhoozi means he who avenges, associated with MK PLU, symbolized by figures like Muhoozi Kainerugaba or General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, introduces a new paradigm characterized by a blend of continuity and reformism, inspired by notions of renewal and revitalization. So this ethos seeks to transcend traditional political divisions and usher in a new era of governance. However, it also invokes concerns about the concentration of power and the perpetuation of dynastic rule in Uganda's politics. And that is something, again, you may want to think about and pray about. Not so. Now listen, the collision between these two paradigms reverberates through Uganda's democratic landscape, posing profound questions about the nature of political pluralism and the vitality of multipartyism. So, on one hand, Dr. Besigye's resurgence embodies the resilience of opposition forces and the imperative of dissent in safeguarding democratic principles. The argument here is that his continued activism serves as a bulwark against authoritarian tendencies and a reminder of the enduring struggle for political freedom. That is another question for debate. On the other hand, we could argue that the emergence of the Avengers ethos reflects a broad trend in terms of Ugandan politics, where the allure of transformative leadership competes with the imperatives of democratic governance. While proponents of the MK envision a progressive agenda for national renewal, criticism may warn of the danger of consolidating power in the hands of selected few and undermining the principles of democratic accountability. And that is something, again, we must be mindful as we argue this debate. So the question here, again, is in this dialectic between tradition and transformation, Uganda stands at crossroads, grappling with competing visions of political change and societal progress. The argument being here is that the clash between the return of Dr. Besigye and the Avengers ethos of MK underscores the complexity of Uganda's political landscape and the challenge inherent in navigating the tensions between continuity, change, tradition, and innovation. And if you realize, I have not mentioned much about the baby wine movement or the people power movement, but ultimately I'll also talk about it as we continue. So the impact of this ideology clash on democracy and multipartyism in Uganda hinges on the nation's ability to reconcile competing visions of governance and chart a path forward that honors the principles of inclusivity, transparency, and popular participation. Only through a robust commitment of these democratic values and institutions can Uganda overcome its political dividends or divisions and forge a future that reflects the aspiration of its diverse citizenry. And that is something, again, that is important to comprehend as we continue. Listen, my friends, the phenomenon of individuals associated with founding political parties in terms of resurgency or even asserting influence when they actually sense a change of direction within those parties raises important questions about the democracy, particularly regarding the principles of multi-party and democratic governance. Now listen, while such resurgences may actually reflect democratic rights of individuals to participate in the political processes and advocate for their preferred visions of governance, they also raise concerns about the concentration of power, okay, and the erosion of democratic principles. We have just seen that. I said the resurgency perhaps by way of MK, the resurgency of Kiiza Besigye again getting back into FDC. Are we seeing again Aslam perhaps also assuming in the hands or perhaps coming in the leg after Besigye? That's a question of a debate. But firstly, the resurgency of founding figures within the political parties can potentially create a sense of dynastic rule or entrenchment of power within certain functions or families, resembling a form of political monarchy, and that is something you have to be very mindful of. So this concentration of power may undermine the principles of democracy that could lead to a lack of accountability, transparency, and fair competition within political organizations. And that's why making the argument of politically correct, we'll talk about what Professor Bloom says, Alan Bloom. So when one individual or family dominates a party's leadership for an extended period, it may limit opportunities for new voices and for new ideas and leadership style to emerge, stifling internal democracy and innovation. And that is something, again, we must be very mindful of. Moreover, the weakening of multipartyism, which is, predicated on the existence of diverse political parties representing different interests and ideologies, can actually erode the foundations of democracy. So if founding figures or dominant factions within parties control the political landscape, it may limit the genuine competition and choice of voters, reducing the vibrancy of political discourse and stifling alternative perspectives. So in such a scenario, the principles of pluralism and representation are essential to health in terms of democratic systems may actually be compromised. And that's the danger that we have to look out for even as we get excited about some of these transformations in this country. And also important to note that the influence exerted by founding figures or dominant factions within parties may actually lead to a concentration of resources, and aspects of patronage and even decision-making power in the hands of a few, perpetuating inequalities and also reinforcing existing power structures. And so this concentration of power can actually undermine the ability of grassroots movements and also marginalized communities and opposition forces to challenge the status quo and hold leaders accountable, and therefore weakening the democratic fabric of the society as we know it today. No doubt that even NUP, as we know it today, is probably concentrated around 8 members of family in terms of that concept as well. So it's important that although people may be excited about the resurgence of founding figures within political parties or perhaps extensions of legacies through their next of kin, it may initially reflect democratic participation and engagement, but also poses significant challenges on the principles of democracy and multipartyism and also accountability. So to uphold democratic values and strengthen political pluralism, it therefore is essential to foster a culture of inclusivity, transparency, and also democratic governance within political parties, ensuring that power is distributed equitably and that diverse voices are heard and also represented. Additionally, robust institutional mechanisms such as internal party democracy, electoral reform, and civic engagement initiatives are also necessary to safeguard these democratic processes or whatever ambits against the risk of posed by concentration of power and the weakening of multipartyism. And that is something, again, we must comprehend from the word go. So the debate as we know it today, I want to delve a little bit deeper into the discussion considering the influence of the resurgence of these founding figures within political parties on individual personalities, and whether or not these can have a substantive effect on the democratic process as we know it today, in terms of party structures and the broader economic environment, including external influences and the weakening of the opposition to that effect. Not so. And this is something we may want also to argue for purposes of this debate. Now, listen. Number one, there's what we call personality on individual level. People may argue or may follow particular heads because of personality on individual level. So the resurgence of these founding figures within political figures often revolves around charismatic personalities who command significant influence and loyalty from their supporters. No doubt that when Besigye begins moving under the ambit of FDC, he gets that audience. So this, on individual level, these figures may actually embody certain values or ideologies or even historical legacies that resonate with their followers, and their return to prominence can actually evoke strong emotions, attachments among their supporters, who may view them as symbols of resistance or agents of change. Not so. However, it can also lead to personality-centric in terms of approach to politics, where individuals become the focal point of political movements, so overshadowing broader ideology debates and even grassroots participation. And perhaps that's the question that FDC may be facing today as a party. Not so. Number two, we could also argue in terms of what they call organization of party structures. That's another challenge. The resurgence of founding figures within political parties can actually have profound implications on the organizational structure and the internal dynamics of these parties. So these figures, in most cases, often exert considerable influence over party structures, shaping decision-making processes, candidate selection, for example, and even policy direction. And therefore, the return may actually reinforce hierarchical power structures within these parties, where loyalty to these leaders takes precedence over institutional mechanisms and internal democracy. So therefore, it's important for you to comprehend that this concentration of power at the top can actually stifle dissent or limit opportunities of new leadership to emerge and undermine the principles of transparency and accountability within the party's organization. And that is, again, something that is extremely important for us to comprehend, again, from the word go. Number three, as a challenge, we could also argue in terms of what they call economic, environmental, or even external influences. Not so. So the resurgence of these founding figures within political parties occur within broader context of the economic environment, where external influences and vested interests play a significant role. So the argument here is that powerful state players, often entrenched in corruption perhaps, or even vested interests, may seek to manipulate political dynamics to serve their own agendas. So in Uganda's case, the influence, for example, of the MK movement perhaps may be associated with certain economic interests that may intersect with external forces, not so, including foreign actors or even regional powers seeking to exert their influence over Uganda's political landscape. So it is in terms of FDC, perhaps in the likes of Kiiza Besigye. So it is in terms of NUP or any other party for that purpose. So this external interference, coupled with economic pressure and corruption, can actually further weaken the opposition forces such as NUP, led by Bobby Wine, limiting their ability to effectively challenge the status quo and even offer alternative visions as far as governance is concerned. And that is something that is extremely important for you, again, to comprehend from the word go. Now listen, the resurgence of founding figures within political parties, as I said, exert influence on multiple levels, from individual personalities to party structures and to the broader economic environment. So it's important that while it may also galvanize support and shape political discourse, it also raises concerns about the concentration of power, in terms of internal democracy and susceptibility to external influences. And therefore, to uphold democratic principles and also foster genuine political pluralism, it is essential, my friends, to promote transparency, accountability, and grassroots participation within political parties, ensuring that power is distributed equitably and diverse voices are actually heard and represented. And additionally, the efforts to address corruption and external interference is also crucial to the safeguarding of the integrity of Uganda's political system. And that is something that you must understand in terms of preserving these so-called democratic values. That is super, super important even as we continue our argument. So it's important, my friends, that even as we continue in this wonderful debate, to comprehend that in the nows of Uganda's political saga, titanic clash emerges, a clash not merely of individuals or factions, but of ideologies and ethos that actually reverberate through the corridors of power and the depth of societal consciousness. And this clash, embodied in the evocative title, The Return of Dr. Besigye versus the Avengers ethos of MK, beckons us to embark on a philosophical odyssey, as I told you, a quest for understanding that transcends the superficialities of partisanship in terms of rivalry, and delving into existential currents that animate Uganda's socio-political landscape. And that is something you may want to comprehend, again, from the word go. And even as we continue, my argument here as an author perhaps, but also as a jurist of sorts, I'll try to guide my discussion on profound journey of some kind of introspection, inviting us to contemplate the enigmatic interplay of forces that shape destiny of nations. And I would like to argue in terms of my seminal work that exploring the depth of philosophical reflections on political conjecture and also deep state analysis and political correctness, I will provide a beacon in terms of intellectual illumination by way of a torchlight that pierces through the shadows of uncertainty and ambiguity to reveal the underlying truth that lie at the very heart of Uganda's political discourse. And the argument here being that at the heart of my inquiry, in terms of this philosophical inquiry, lies the saga that Dr. Besigye, a towering figure whose return to the forefront of Ugandan politics ignites what they call a maelstrom of controversy and contention. Yet beyond the surface of tarmac, I will beckon a deeper, inquiry into unraveling the intricacies of political conjecture that underpin Dr. Besigye's resurgence. And therefore, incisive of this analysis, I will try to confront the nebulous realm of speculation and hypothesis, probing the depth of conjectural analysis to unearth the insights that elude the casual observer. And this is something that we need to comprehend, again, as we have this debate. But as we continue, and as far as this debate, the journey does not end there. The argument here is that I will lead you to further, inquiry into creating what they call a labyrinth maze of deep state analysis, a realm where hidden forces exert their influence in the shadows, shaping the contours of power and authority with a clandestine precision. So amidst the whispers of conspiracy and intrigue, I will guide you through a map of waters of political intrigue, shedding light on the hidden power structures that lurk beneath the surface of official discourse. And that is something that you get ready for even as we begin to discuss. Yet, in spite of that, even in the midst of this shadowy depth, a gleam of hope definitely will emerge in terms of a beacon of moral clarity, in terms of illuminating the path towards more enlightened and just society. It is the light of political correctness in terms of a guiding principle that will compel you and me to try to navigate the treacherous waters of political discourse with sensitivity and compassion. So I will try to penetrate by way of reflection and confronting the complexities in terms of language, identity, and social justice, grappling with the profound implications of political correctness in as far as Uganda's social political landscape is concerned. Remember the words that I started with in terms of political correctness. Please do not forget that, because that becomes extremely important in terms of the discussion that we're having here today. So as we embark on this journey again with this odyssey, we are reminded that the true wisdom lies not in the facile answers or superficial analysis, but in the courage to confront complexity and ambiguity with intellectual rigor and moral clarity. So in exploring the depth, I will discover not merely a treatise on political theory, but a call to arms, a call to engage with the profound questions that animate Uganda's political discourse, and to chart a course towards a more enlightened and just future. And that is the argument that I would like to comprehend. So even as I argue that in the labyrinth of the landscape of Uganda's political terrain, where every step bears the weight of historical legacies and contemporary challenges, a journey will unfold, a journey in terms of profound introspection, in terms of the intellectual inquiry. So this expedition is not merely a traversal of physical landscape, but an odyssey into the depth of thought, navigating the intricate interplay in terms of the power, perception, and ideology. And at its helm, the argument will be in terms of seeking truth, seeking wisdom, poised to embark on a quest that transcends the superficialities of partisanship as far as politics, and delve into philosophical underpinnings of Uganda's socio-political tapestry. And that is something, again, that is extremely important that we need to comprehend again from the word go. And in exploring the depth again, in terms of mere philosophical reflection, in terms of the political conjecture and deep state analysis and political correctness, I will beckon a voyage of sorts in terms of the contemplation, a voyage that traverses the rims of conjecture in terms of speculation, or charting the contours of political discourse in Uganda's ever-shifting landscape. And this is something that is extremely important. So with meticulous precision and intellectual acumen, I will invite us again to unravel the mysteries of power in terms of dynamics and hidden forces that shape the trajectory of our nation today as we understand it in terms of Uganda. And that is something, again, that we cannot let go. Now listen, at the heart of this journey again, we'll try to examine in terms of political conjecture again, a probe in terms of an exploration of speculative currents that ripple beneath the surface of conventional wisdom. So through this discerning gaze, I will try to confront the enigma of the uncertainty and ambiguity, the plumbing of the depth of conjectural analysis to unearth insights that elude the casual observer. And this is something, again, that I've said on and on in terms of giving us a preamble of what we are trying to engage ourselves in. And as I said, the journey does not end here. It beckons us again into a shadowy recess of deep state analysis, a realm shrouded in terms of secrecy and intrigue, where clandestine forces exert their influence beyond the purview of public scrutiny. So here, amidst the whispers of conspiracy and covert machinations, I will try to navigate the murky waters of politics, illuminating for you and for myself the contours that are hidden in as far as power structures are concerned, that lurk beneath the veneer of official discourse. And that is something, again, that would argue as we continue. Yet, even as I do so, in the midst of these intellectual depth, I will try to beacon, as I said, a light to illuminate the path towards a more enlightened and inclusive future. So therefore, it will become a light of political correctness in terms of guiding principles that compel us to trend with sensitivity and compassion in our interactions with others. And that is something that we must understand as we confront the complexities of language, identity, and social justice, grappling with the profound implications of political correctness in Uganda's socio-political landscape as we know it today. And that is something, again, that we cannot take away from our discussion. Extremely important arguments for us to understand. So in terms of this voyage, we will create that debate, we are reminded, obviously, that the true wisdom lies not in the facile answers of superficial analysis, but in the courage to confront the complexities and ambiguity with intellectual rigor and also moral clarity. I've said that on and on. But in terms of exploring the depth, we will discover not merely the compendium of ideas, but a call to action, a call to engage with the profound questions and animate Uganda's political discourse, and also chart a course towards a more enlightened and just society. And this is something, again, that's extremely important for us to comprehend. So the debate therefore becomes, in terms of the questions of a conjugal or political correctness, or in terms of arguing, in terms of the debate that we're having today, whether or not this political space is a deep state action or something that is politically conjugate. Let's first start with political conjecture, perhaps. Now, if you're arguing in terms of political conjecture analysis as a term would imply a level of speculation and analysis, suggesting an exploration of hypothetical scenarios and underlying dynamics within political system. It will convey ideas in terms of rigorous examination and interpretation of political phenomena, often drawing upon diverse theoretical frameworks and empirical evidence to construct informed conjectures about power structures and governance dynamics. And that is something that you must understand. Now, if you're to argue, on the other hand, the argument of deep state, now the term deep state is often used to describe a hypothetical secretive network made up of individuals within government institutions or other influential positions, such as the military or even intelligence agencies or even bureaucratic agencies that are believed to be working together to manipulate policy and control government actions. And that's the question of the day, regardless of who is formally in power. And that is something you must understand. You could call it some kind of mafia-like movement, or state-like, or embody-like, that preempts or tends to orchestrate the movements under the nation. Now, if you are to argue in terms of political conjecture, in terms of deep state analysis, then the phrase would actually convey the idea of examining the concept of the deep state through a lens of speculative inquiry, and the analysis suggesting an essence exploration of hidden power structures within political systems. And this is something you must comprehend. So while acknowledging the speculative nature of such examination, it's important for me to comprehend and argue the following for us in terms of the debate that we're having today. So please understand that we are now getting deeper into the argument that I've promised ourselves to understand. Now, listen. The supporters of the concept argue that this idea of deep state operates independently of elected officials, and it has its own agenda, often serving the interests of a selected few rather than the broader public or the government in terms of power. And in doing so, one should be mindful that the critics of the idea often dismiss it as a conspiracy, as a conspiracy theory, arguing that democratic institutions and checks and balances within government prevent such ununified and secretive groups from actually wielding significant power. That's something that is food for thought for those of you who may want to further contemplate on that. But the argument here I'm proponing is that the term has actually been used by various contexts around the world, often in relation to allegations of corruption, clandestine influence, or even manipulation of government policies. However, concrete evidence supporting the existence of deep state, as described by its proponents, is generally lacking. And the discussion around the concept can actually be highly polarized. But we will try to make a debate nonetheless in terms of that argument. Now, the term deep state could also be applied in somewhat a metaphorical sense, although it diverges somewhat from the conventional understanding of the term. I'm going to try to attempt to contextualize it in terms of the debate that we're having today, so that we may comprehend what we are talking about. And by doing so, I will argue in terms of the following points. Number one, in terms of internal power struggle within, for example, the FDC, or the Forum for Democratic Change, the party has been led by individuals like Kiiza Besigye, Patrick Oboy, Amriat. They represent a political party that actually opposes the ruling party, which is NRM, National Resistance Movement, led by the President Museveni. Not so. So the internal factions within FDC such as the Elias Katonga faction and the Nakulabi faction, are actually vying for control and influence within the party. Not so. And in doing so, they actually create that, debate and struggle for us as we argue what we are arguing. Now, number two, allegations of compromise, for example. Each faction accuses the other of being compromised by the ruling party. Not so. The ruling party being NRM. So this accusation also suggests suspicions of infiltration or manipulation by elements within the government in terms of institutions or other influential positions akin to the notion of deep state. And that's something I want you to comprehend. So the allegations may imply that certain individuals within FDC have agendas that align more closely perhaps with the interests of the ruling party than with the opposition's objectives. And that is something, again, you may also want to comprehend in terms of that. And number three, I would also argue and say that there could also be in terms of what they call external influences. Yeah, the involvement of, for example, of another gentleman, Jack Sabiti, who is opposing the sitting party president, Patrick Oboy Amrad, could actually add another layer in terms of the dynamics. It's unclear whether Sabiti's candidacy is actually independent or if there are actually external forces supporting him. Not so. So potentially linked again to the ruling party's interest. That is another food for thought. So this could further, fuel suspicions of external manipulation or influence within the FDC. And that is something that, again, you may also want to comprehend. Now, we could also argue in terms of potential resurgence of Besigye as a candidate or as a possible party leader again. So the possible resurgence of Kiiza Besigye, a retired former, president of FDC, could actually exacerbate the tensions within the party. If Besigye, for example, returns to active involvement, then there may be concerns about his intentions and whether he actually aims to reclaim control of the party structures. So this could actually lead to accusations of power grabs and internal struggles reminiscent of those attributed to a deep state. And that is the argument that I'm proponing in terms of a deep state as an argument for you today here. Not so. Now, in this scenario, while the term deep state in my argument may not directly apply to traditional government institutions, it can still be used to describe the perceived clandestine networks or even power struggles within the FDC. Yeah, with allegations of external manipulation, for example, and internal power, plays that mirror some aspects of the concept, and that's something you cannot take away from the debate. Not so. And in doing so, the concept of deep state is often invoked by, for example, various ideological perspectives to explain perceived power structures and influences within governments. And I'm going to give some ideological theories that commonly are associated with the deep state theory and how they have actually been used by the proponents in terms of that, in terms of our dispensation today. Not so. And I'll begin by talking about a guy called the argument called anti-establishment, or what they call the populist ideology. Anti-establishment, or what they call populist ideology. Proponents of anti-establishment or populist ideologies often utilize the deep state theory to frame the government as being controlled by a secretive and self-serving elite. So disconnection or disconnected from the interests of the other broader population. So they argue that this elite group, entrenched with bureaucratic and institutional position, manipulates policy to maintain its own power and privileges. Yeah. So populist leaders or movements may actually rally their supporters by presenting themselves as outsiders, fighting against the so-called deep state control. And that is something, again, you may want to comprehend in terms of the argument that we're having here today. Yes and yes. Now, we could also argue in terms of conspiracy theory ideologies. Yeah. Conspiracy theories often adapt the deep state concept to suggest that powerful and shadowy forces covertly manipulate government actions for their own nefarious ends. Not so. And they may believe in the existential of what they call cabal of influential individuals, such as wealthy elites or intelligence agencies or even corporate interests, who actually conspire to control politics and world events behind the scenes. So conspiracy theories may also use the deep state theory to explain perceived inconsistencies, not so, and cover-ups and also unexplained occurrences within the government actions as understood. So that's something, again, you also may want to comprehend. Now, you could also argue in terms of what they call authoritarian or authoritarian regimes. And now, if you are looking at that in terms of authoritarian regimes, the deep state theory can actually serve as a convenient tool for leaders to justify their own consolidation of power. and repression of dissent. So these regimes may actually propagate the idea of a deep state, such as a means of deflecting blame for government failures or suppressing opposition movements. Not so. So by framing dissenting voices as part of the substantive deep state plot, the authoritarian leaders can actually legitimize crackdowns on civil liberties and even on opposition groups. And that is something, again, you have to comprehend in terms of this debate that we're having today. In terms of another argument, you could argue in terms of national security and intelligence communities. Within, the argument here is that within national securities and intelligence communities, the concept of deep state may actually be invoked to describe the influence exerted by career officials, and bureaucratic structures over government in terms of decision making. So some analysts who may argue that the entrenched interest of these institutions can actually shape foreign and domestic policies to serve as their own agendas, and regardless of the preferences of the elected officials. Not so. So this perspective highlights the tension between democratic governance and the need for expertise and continuity in matters of national security. And that is something, again, you cannot take away from this debate. That is extremely, extremely important to understand. So the successful use of deep state theory by governments often depends on the political context and the extent on which it resonates with public sentiments. And it sometimes, it creates certain cases, or governments may actually exploit the concept to discredit political opponents or even justify authoritarian measures. But however, the validity of the deep state theory is actually subject to debate, which critics often, often dismissing it as a simplistic or even conspirational explanation of the complex political dynamics. And that is, again, something you're going to take away from the debate that we are having here today. Now listen, the argument I'm proponing further is that the concept of deep state has actually been discussed and analyzed by various thinkers and researchers and theorists across different disciplines, including political science, sociology, conspiracy theory studies. So while there isn't any single originator of the term, several figures have actually contributed to its popularization in terms of conceptual development. And some notable thinkers and theorists associated with the concept of deep state may include some of the people that I'm going to discuss for you. And to start with, I'll start with a gentleman called Peter Dale Scott. Now, Peter Dale Scott was a former Canadian diplomat and professor emeritus of English at the University of California, Berkeley. Now, Peter Dale Scott is perhaps one of the most influential figures in popularizing the concept of deep state. He has actually written extensively in the topic, particularly in his book called The Deep State. The Deep State, the fall of constitution and the rise of a shadow government. And that is something I was also making and explaining to the people who visit us here from NBS in terms of comprehending the argument of the debate that we're having today. But another proponent, if you like, is the guy called Mark Lofgren, a former congressional staff member who worked for nearly 3 decades in various roles within the US Congress. Mark Lofgren gained attention for his writing on the deep state. He published a notable essay entitled The Autonomy of the Deep State, which explored the influence of unelected and unaccountable institutions within the American government. And that is another proponent for those of you who may want to look at it further. Then you could also argue another guy called Mark Ambida. Mark Ambida and D.B. Grady, in their book Deep State, Inside the Government Secrecy Industry, journalistic Mark Ambida and D.B. Grady examine the hidden networks and the structures within the US government that shape national security and policies and operations. And they also provide insights into the interconnectedness of various agencies and also the influence that they wield. And that is something, again, those of you who are interested in following it a bit further, that may give you a basis for your argument in terms of that. You could also look at another individual called David Rothkopf. David Rothkopf was a political scientist and author. He discussed the concept of what they call the superclass. And in his book, The Superclass, the global power elite and the world they are making, while not explicitly using the term deep state, Rothkopf actually explores the idea of a transnational elite network that operates across borders and influences what they call global affairs. And that is, those of you who may want to take a deeper delve may want to also comprehend. Then there's another guy called John Meshiner. Now, John Meshiner was a prominent international relations scholar. He has actually written about the role of the military-industrial complex in shaping U.S. foreign policy. So while not explicitly using the term deep state, his work contributes to understanding the influence of entrenched interests on government decision making. And that is something, again, that's extremely important for you to comprehend as far as the concept of deep state. Then you could also argue in terms of conspiracy theories, in terms of various conspiracy theories such as Alex Jones on the infos and theories within the Ancon movement, within the Ancon movement that have popularized and actually expanded upon the deep state concept, often portraying it as a malevolent force orchestrating global events behind the scenes. And that is something, again, that you may want to comprehend further for those of us who are interested in comprehending the deep state. Now, these thinkers and theorists have actually approached the concept of deep state from, again, different angles. And that's the argument we hear, examining their implications in terms of governance, in terms of democracy, in terms of the geopolitics. So while their perspectives may vary, their work has actually contributed to a broader discourse surrounding the phenomenon of hidden or even what they call unaccountable power structures within governments. And this is, again, something that you cannot take away from this debate. Now, also, the argument here is that while the term deep state as we understand it today may not have been explicitly articulated by ancient thinkers, there are some philosophical and historical insights that touch upon similar themes of hidden power structures within the influence of government. And I'm going to discuss a few of those in terms of examples. And this is what we are looking out for and as far as this debate is concerned. I want to begin by discussing a guy called Plato. Plato is very common to many of you, I'm sure. Plato, in terms of the Republic, he discusses the concept of the guardians, in terms of the philosopher, king, who govern society. And these guardians are actually meant to be wise and virtuous rulers who actually have the best interest of the state at heart. However, there is also a concern about the potential for corruption and the abuse of power among those who actually hold authority. So Plato's allegory of the curve can also be interpreted as an exploration of the hidden truth and manipulation of perception by those in power. And that is something, again, you cannot take away in terms of this debate. Then there's another individual called Thucydides. Thucydides, in his treatise called The History of Peloponnesian War, the so-called Peloponnesian War, Thucydides explores the dynamics of power and politics in ancient Greece. He actually highlights the role of factions, alliances, behind the scenes of negotiations in shaping the course of events. So while Thucydides doesn't use the term deep state, his work actually provides insights into the complexities of power structures and their influence in terms of governance as we know it today. So the debate, again, here is trying to understand the challenge of the resurgence of Besigye and then the argument of the MK, the PLU vis-a-vis the people power Bobby Wine movement in terms of the political transitions that we have in Uganda today. Another guy is Niccolo Machiavelli, in terms of his book called The Prince, delves into the nature and the power and the strategies of rulers that they employ to maintain control. So while Machiavelli focuses is more on tactics of governance rather than hidden power structures per se, his writing underscores the ruthless realities of political power and the political, aspects as far as manipulation behind the scenes is concerned. And then another popular one is Zanzu. Zanzu, in terms of the art of war, Zanzu discusses the importance of intelligence, deception, and understanding the enemy's strength and weaknesses. While primarily a treatise on military strategy, Zanzu insights can actually be applied in terms of broader context of power, dynamics, and also governance, and including the idea of hidden influences and clandestine operations. And that is something, again, you cannot take away from this debate in terms of the comprehension of the debate that we're having today. So please understand that while these ancient thinkers may not have directly addressed the concept of deep state as we understand it today, their writings touch upon themes related to governance, related to power and influence that actually resonate with contemporary discussions about hidden or even entrenched power structures within societies. And these are good lessons for us to pick from and learn and comprehend so that we can know how we can deal with the situation that we have today. Let's explore a little bit of political correctness. if we are to argue political correctness, we will understand that it will refer to the use of language or behavior that is intended to avoid offending or marginalize certain groups or people, not so, particularly those who have been historically disadvantaged or discriminated against. So the concept emerged in the later half of the 20th century as a response to societal efforts to promote inclusivity, diversity, and sensitivity to issues of identity such as race, gender, sexuality, disability, and even religion. Yeah, but we are seeing it being applicable today, and that's the argument that we are bringing in our debate today. In practice, being politically correct often involves using language that is actually respectful, inclusive, and avoiding terms of oppression that may actually perpetuate stereotypes or discrimination or even harm. It can also encompass efforts to challenge systematic biases and also promote what they call social justice, and by advocating for policies and even practices that actually address inequality and discrimination. And that is something, again, you cannot take away in terms of the debate that we are having today, whether or not these individuals are actually acting in terms of political correctness. However, it's important to note, my friends, that the concept of political correctness is also subject to criticism. Some argue that it can actually stifle free speech or legitimate debate by imposing restrictions on language and even expressions. Others contend that it focuses too heavily on superficial challenges in language and behavior without actually addressing underlying structural inequalities. And that is, again, something that you must comprehend even as we engage in the debate that we're having today. Now, please understand that overall the meaning of this argument of political correctness is a complex and context-dependent, reflecting broader societal debates about language, identity, power, and social change. And that is the argument that we are proponing in terms of whether or not these individuals are being politically correct when they make the propositions that they do today. Now, it's possible to argue that Kiiza Besigye's actions could actually be interpreted through the lens of political correctness, yeah? Or even the arguments, or even MK could actually be interpreted through the lens of political correctness. But it's also important to clarify what is meant by political correctness in this context. Please understand that. Now, if by political correctness, the argument here is that Besigye is attempting to navigate the internal power structures or struggles within his party in a manner that avoids offending or marginalizing certain groups of people, then yes, his actions could actually be seen as an attempt to maintain unity and respect within the party despite the conflict. So will it go mutatis mutandis for MK in terms of what he's doing, in terms of the new movement, in terms of the PLU? Not so. However, it's worth noting that this political correctness, as commonly understood, primarily pertains to language and behavior aimed at inclusivity, sensitivity towards historically marginalized groups in the context of internal party dynamics. So the term might not directly apply in the same way as it does to broader social interactions, as I just argued. And that is important for you to comprehend in terms of that argument. So instead, the argument could actually be that Besigye's actions might actually be more accurately described as attempts to navigate political alliances or maintain influence or even merge internal tensions, okay, within the party. So these actions could actually involve strategic maneuvers or negotiations or attempts to bridge divides rather than strictly adhering to the principles of of political correctness, as it were. And that is something that, again, you must understand from the word go as we comprehend into this wonderful debate. Not so. Now, please understand again that the term political correctness has no single inventor. It's usually basically evolved over time, but its popularization can actually be attributed to a variety of resources, and that's something that we may comprehend. I would argue, for example, in the US, the term gained prominence in the late 20th century, particularly during the 1980s and 1990s, and it was used to describe efforts to promote sensitivity and inclusivity in language and behavior, yeah, especially in discussions surrounding race, surrounding gender, for example, sexuality, and other identity-related issues. So that argument gives you the origin of sorts in terms of the argument of political correctness. Now, the terms used obviously became more widespread through media coverage in terms of political debates and also cultural commentary during this period. So critics of political correctness often use the term to disparage or to disparage what they perceived as excessive restrictions on speech, for example, and behavior. So while proponents argued that it was a necessary tool for combating discrimination and also promoting what they call social justice. And that is something, again, we cannot take away from this debate. And that's extremely important for you to comprehend as we continue. Now, please understand that although it's difficult to pinpoint a single individual as the inventor of this particular term, it's associated with various scholars and activists and commentators who have actually contributed to its popularization in terms of the debate. You may argue that as far as Uganda is concerned, well, maybe I may be the very first person to argue in terms of political correctness, in terms of underscoring them in terms of Besigye, or perhaps in terms of the MK, or even in terms of NUP, for example. So some prominent figures in terms of discussion about political correctness include academicians like Herbert Makasi, who discussed the concept that is related to what they call repressive tolerance, and writers such as Alan Bloom, the author of Closing the American Mind, who actually critiqued and what he saw as the stifling effects of political correctness on intellectual discourse. So overall, the argument here is that the term political correctness emerged organically from broader social and political discussions, and its meaning continues to evolve in response to changing cultural and political dynamics. And that is something, again, you cannot take away from the debate. That's the reason why I'm arguing it here for the case of the resurgence of Kiiza Besigye vis-a-vis the formidable force of MK movement vis-a-vis the sweeping force of NUP in as far as the political landscape is concerned. So it is also possible to interpret the resurgence of figures like Kiiza Besigye within FDC and the potential emergence of individuals like Muhoozi Kainerugaba within the MK movement, the PLO, or other political factions as strategic moves aimed at addressing perceived challenges within their respective political spheres. However, whether these actions can actually be specifically characterized as attempts to be politically correct depends on the context of the motivations behind them, and that is something that you cannot take away again from this debate. Let's just argue, for example, resurgence as far as Besigye within FDC. Besigye's return to prominence within FDC could actually be seen as a response to internal party dynamics, including power struggles and perceived weaknesses. Not so. So his re-emergence might actually be aimed at providing leadership, rallying support, and even addressing divisions within the party. However, whether this constitutes a form of political correctness depends on whether his actions align with the effort to promote inclusivity, sensitivity, and unity within the party. And that is something that I'm trying to argue for you today in terms of that component. Now, you could also argue in terms of potential emergence of Muhoozi Kainerugaba. Not so. Similarly, if Muhoozi Kainerugaba or General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, okay, or others within the MK and other political factions rise to prominence, the actions may be interpreted as responses to perceived challenges within the ruling NRM and broader political landscape. Not so. So whether their emergence could actually be considered as an attempt to be politically correct, depends on the extent to which their actions are aimed, okay, at addressing concerns about the party's direction or the country's direction for that purpose, as far as leadership or inclusivity is concerned. That is something, again, we cannot take away from the debate. Please understand that. Now, so in both cases, it's important to consider the broader political context of the motivations and the implications of these developments. So while strategic moves within political parties are common and often driven by a desire to, adapt to changing circumstances, whether they can actually be specifically characterized as politically correct depends on the extent to which they align with the efforts to promote sensitivity, inclusivity, and unity within the perspective of political spheres in which they engage themselves in. And that is something, again, you cannot take away from this debate. So please understand that this argument, or whether we're arguing Muhoozi Kainerugaba, basically known by his name in terms of the association with the movement for what? For the MK movement, and in terms of its launch of the PLU, this move argumentatively is significant in the context of Uganda's political dynamics, especially considering Muhoozi's familiar ties with the president, for example, being a son, obviously, and his potential aspirations of political leadership. So you could argue that in terms of political correctness, in terms of that argument as well. So this is important for us to argue again in terms of that. Now, please understand that the emergence of PLU could also be seen as a strategic maneuver aimed at consolidating the support of Muhoozi's political ambitions and ensuring continuity of the ruling party's influence, particularly amidst growing discontent for the cause for political change because of the aging group, the powers that be, in fact of the fact of age. By forming PLU, Muhoozi may actually seek to outmaneuver potential competitors, including NUP or including aging potential competitors within the NRM, and also emerging youth-oriented movements such as Bobi Wine's NUP party, not so, and People Power movement, not so. So that is something, again, you may well comprehend in terms of that argument. Please, this debate is for purposes of intellectualism rather than arousing any kind of rebellions of sorts, whether criminal or civil, to that effect. So the argument is that PLU establishment underscores the evolving dynamics within Uganda's political landscape, within various actors vying for power and influence amidst shifting societal demands and expectations. So Muhoozi's involvement in PLU would suggest a desire to position himself strategically within the changing political environment, potentially changing or shaping the trajectory of Uganda's political future as we know it today, in spite of the changes that may have happened as we know today. Not so. Now, as such, the argument here is that PLU formation and Muhoozi leadership within it warrant careful observation, as they have actually potential to impact the balance of power and also to, the direction of political discourse as far as the country is concerned, especially as the country navigates through a period of political transition and generational shifts. Remember that in terms of generational shifts, that becomes extremely important for the PLU. Not so. Now, I would try to argue some theories that would relate to the argument that we are talking about today. If I may talk about the conflict theory, for example, within the Marxist theory, the group theory could actually be applied to understand the dynamics within the Forum for Democratic Change and the resurgence of Kiiza Besigye. Okay? If you're to argue the conflict theory within the Marxist theory, for example, in terms of the resurgence of this guy, the conflict theory as a key component of Marxist theory emphasizes the role of conflict and struggle in shaping social relations and institutions. So according to this perspective, society is actually divided into conflicting classes where the ruling class, the so-called bourgeoisie, exploits or oppresses the working class, so the so-called proletariat, not so. So these tensions are perpetuated by the inherent contradictions with capitalism, and that is something, again, you must understand, again, in terms of the debate that we're having today. Please comprehend where we're coming from. Now, applying the conflict theory to FDC, we can view the internal structures within the party through a class-based lens. Different factions, within the party may represent conflicting interests and perspectives, mirroring what they call broader societal division. For example, there may be tensions, not so, between the grassroots activists advocating for radical change, or even party elites seeking to maintain the status quo. And so these can cause divisions and different, groups, if you like, as we know them today. The Katonga group vis-a-vis the Nakurabi group, not so. Now, Kiiza Besigye's resurgence within the FDC can also be understood as a manifestation of these internal conflicts in terms of so Besigye being a prominent opposition figure with a history of challenging the ruling party authority may actually represent the interest of the marginalized groups within the party.